Hi, Jess. Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you, Manny. How are you?
I'm very, very well. Very, very well. Thank you for joining us on the Mentality Podcast. Wanted to let the audience know, Jess, because I think one of the key things that we've wanted to do on mentality is introduce people to lots of different people from all over the world, from different corners, from different backgrounds. I'd love for you to tell the audience a little bit about who you are, where you are, and what you do.
Sure thing. So, in case the audience haven't met myself, I'm jessxgoh. I'm the sole founder of Life in Confidence, and I'm based in Bondi Beach, Australia. It's super sunny with this beautiful summer weather. And what I do is I help empower heart-centered, burnt-out professionals all over the world from the impacts of childhood abuse. And I
Mm,
do this by helping them to release anger and anxiety and grief drug free.
excellent. You mentioned heart-centered individuals. Can you elaborate a little bit on what that means?
Yeah, definitely. So when I use the word heart centered, what that means is that they have a sole purpose in this life. They're somewhat quite aware that they want to make a difference to the world, whether it's in their corporate jobs or in a business that they're working on or a business idea that they have in mind. And that is leading them to helping people through their soul mission. So being heart centered in that way, wanting to make a difference, whether it's in corporate or in business.
Okay. And what about those that are not quite aware but have begun the journey of being woke, if you want to put it that way?
Yes. um, I have definitely worked with clients who are in the beginning of that journey,
Mhm.
and it has truly opened up their eyes to see what sort of bubble they were living in with trauma and how they can operate at a higher level when
Mhm.
I was able to guide them through in widening up their level of consciousness. So it doesn't have to exactly be, if some people are not sure when they come to see me, but at the end of working together, they become a lot more crystal clear in how they want to make an impact in the world.
Okay. Okay. Excellent. Oftentimes when we have these conversations with our guests, we realize that they're making huge waves and really getting huge impact in the community. But we also realize that their journeys are also very important because without them going through the journeys, they wouldn't have got to where they are now. So let's take a step back. Let's go all the way back to young Jess and growing up in Sydney. Were you still in Sydney growing up? In fact, why don't you let us know about how it was growing up?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm a first generation Australian, and my ethnicity is Chinese Malaysian. So my parents, they came to Malaysia at different timelines, and they came to Australia because they wanted a better life. They were born and brought up in big families of 13 siblings. And of course, there's a lot of dysfunctionality when you're brought up in a huge family because not
Right,
every single sibling are able to get the love and attention from their parents.
of course.
And so there was a lot of trauma that was passed down onto me from my parents because of their unresolved issues with their childhood and how it manifested in the family dynamic when they had myself as a child. So with myself being born and brought up in Sydney, especially
Mhm.
with being Asian, it was really hard for me to figure out who I was
Right.
because I felt like I was white because I was born and brought up in a Western culture.
Yeah.
And I really judged and disconnected with my cultural background just because of the indoctrination that I've experienced and the racism that
Yeah.
I've experienced in school and high school and in my early jobs working at McDonald's. So
Right.
I disowned that part of myself and pride as being Australian. And uh, as things went on, I would see my parents really worked hard for money, and they would eventually quit their jobs and run a hardware business where we would sell hardware tools in the markets.
Okay.
And it was very labor intensive. I was brought up with a father who had a sex addiction. He was engaging with hookers, mistresses. He also had a mistress in China, so he flew to China quite frequently when I was a teenager. And my mother, she was dysfunctional in a different way, where she was emotionally manipulative. And so whenever I would get hit by my dad at the age of 8 and 18, and at the age of 18, I try to protect her from her getting hit by him because there was a lot of domestic violence going on. She would laugh at me and say that I was stupid for speaking up, for protecting her. And she told me to stop crying and to go, yeah. So I didn't feel safe in my family dynamic. On top of that, I was sexually abused by my mother's brother. So I wasn't aware that I was sexually abused because I thought sexual abuse was you were raped. But it could also be that you've been sexually harassed, such as touch, such as scanning. And so he did those things and he would whistle at me. And this all started when I was 16. So he would touch me inappropriately. He would look at me inappropriately. He would whistle at me and say that I'm sexy. So, and he was living in the same roof as our household because he was helping out in the family business. So that was my upbringing.
Wow. And in terms of that, I mean, it seems really tough. What kind of impact did that have on your own mental health and kind of getting through life in school, you know, within your community of friends and so on and so forth? What kind of impact did that have?
Yeah, so I felt like that manifested itself into the outer world. I was bullied for my weight. I've gained weight later in primary school and high school, and that was picked on very fast, was my weight, because I was like, you know, with the Asian culture, there's so much pressure, especially for Asian women, to be pretty and slim and all this sort of stuff and smart and intelligent. And I was picked on for being overweight by a bunch of Asian boys in high school, calling me fat boy. And there was a lot of shame because I was carrying a lot of sexual shame around my identity. And I didn't feel safe to be feminine, to be a female.
Okay. So at what point did this thought process then start to pivot? Like, at what point did it start to change? And what did it take to get you there?
So for me, the penny dropped when I was 29. I started to embark on the journey of self-development at 26. And at 29, I had my last session with a relationship coach.
Okay.
And I lost everything. I had 2 positive cash flow investment properties at the age of 26. I sold them, had 6 figures in my bank account, and I used that cash to run an online dress business because that was the thing back then where you make shitloads of money. And obviously that came from my ego, not from my heart. And in the end, I only had $100 left in my bank account. I wasn't profitable in that business at all. I had to donate all of those dresses to a charity because it cost me so much money to rent out a lock-up garage. And I was just burning cash, trying to get new stock, new designs. And I was also about to end a relationship with a married man who I thought would want to be with me, when in fact he was just as messed up as I was. And I was renting in a shared flat. And my landlord was hounding me money. When are you going to pay for rent? So there was a lot of pressure on me. And with that pressure, there was a lot of shame. I was so close to cutting my mum out of my life because I thought to myself, my life could have been better if she divorced my father and she
Right.
protected the kids rather than getting caught up with, no, I want to keep the house, thinking about money, but not thinking about the welfare of the kids. So when my relationship coach told me that, Jess, you created this yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when the penny dropped for me, because I was so desperate to find the light that I was willing to take on her advice this time, because it was the last session and I only had $100 in my bank account.
No.
And I thought to myself, oh my God, she's right, because I've been living in denial for such a long time because there was so much shame underneath the anger.
Yeah. Accountability is something that I know, a lot of people struggle with, especially when they're going through things, right? Because nobody wants to admit that it's the fault lies predominantly with them. And oftentimes, in the cases of abuse and so on and so forth, the control is not in your hands. But oftentimes, in other circumstances, there are contributing factors that we put forth in certain situations, and then later on forget that we have been part of in order to create the trauma. I want to take a step back though. You mentioned that you started a journey of wellness and well-being at 26, before the penny dropped at 28, 29. What drove you to now start at 26 to now be like, okay, I want to take care of me?
Because my dad passed away when I was 22. And at 26, I decided to move out of home with my mum. And obviously that went really well, because she felt like I betrayed her, I abandoned her, and obviously that's her childhood trauma stuff. And she wanted someone to help her pay for the bills, because I was her cash cow in my early 20s. When my dad decided not to pay for the mortgage anymore, she turned to me with her crocodile tears, and I fell for it because I didn't want my mum crying. So I decided to not pursue anything in education and worked any job that I can get in retail. And I would start paying for the mortgage, pay for the debt, pay for the bills. Right. And so I created this dynamic with her where I was her mother, where I was supporting her financially and emotionally. So it took me a long time to break that pattern with her. So at 26, that's when I discovered my independence by walking away from that pattern and wanting to experience freedom and to be an adult and to start dating, because I was so suppressed by her that you can't date guys until you go to uni, get a professional job, and then you can meet a man. Obviously, university was never my path. I never got a great grade to get into uni anyway. And so I wanted to explore my life. And I started to explore events. And I came across wealth seminars. And this guy introduced me to network marketing, and he introduced me to Tony Robbins and Landmark. And that's when I started to get into self-development.
Okay. That's a great journey. And that journey has ultimately led you to having your 2 properties, and then taking the decision at 28, 29, or even before then, but having the penny drop at 28, 29 to be like, okay, it's all about me. I've created this environment, and so I need to get out of it. Speak to us about how you dealt with that trauma there afterwards, and once you came to the realization of.
The problem was I didn't even deal with the trauma. So I had to figure out how I could trust the advice that was given to me by my relationship coach, because I was very much in my head. I was very anxious. I had a lot of anger and a lot of shame. And I couldn't access the grief. I was so shut down. So I was still living in trauma. I had to force myself to look after myself by getting my shit together, where I had to go on welfare payments, trying to find any job that I can get, and starting to go to free yoga classes that I can get my hands on to start connecting with myself, spend time in nature, like anything that I could do for free, where I could be in more of the feminine state, because that was the teaching that my relationship coach shared with me. I needed
Right.
to be more in the yin, not in the yang.
Yeah.
And things slowly shifted just through that trick itself. And then I started to share from a vulnerable place on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
And that inspired some of my friends. And they wanted to ask me, wow, something has changed inside of you.
Yes.
I would love to find out how you did that. And so that share led me to become a coach, even though I wasn't even qualified by then, but I started to get paying clients.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized the reason for this was because what I went through at that point in time, when the penny dropped, I realized there's so many people out there who are suffering and they're not aware of it.
Yes.
And so many people are in need of help. And they're in need of the right help.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where that journey has taken me. And then afterwards, once I've become a lot more financially stable in corporate, and I was able to get more clients, I started to invest in self-development. So not wealth creation or network marketing or anything like that. I eventually got out of that, and I wanted to focus on working on myself. So I started to become a life coach, trained in a whole heap of different modalities. I'm now trained in 14 healing modalities.
Oh.
And those healing modalities has allowed me to release the trauma on different levels, physically, psychologically, emotionally, energetically.
Excellent. It's one of the, so when we have our men's circles, that's one of the things that we focus on, right? We have a method called pious. So physically, emotionally, intelligently, spiritually, sexually. This is what we follow. And very much like you, we came, most of us, I mean, in the MEN-tality family, came into the realization of the fact that there are so many other people that need help because we went through our own things. And then we got to a stage where we were very open and very vocal, very vulnerable individually about the things that we've been through. And because of that, it opened the door and allowed other people permission to also come and do the same with us. Let's talk about then, once you've started your practice, then where do you see commonly most trauma?
Whoa. I've worked with a lot of men who've experienced sexual abuse.
Okay.
So they've been raped by women.
Okay.
I've worked with a couple that been raped by men as well.
Wow.
Yeah, very intense stuff. And these are men all over the world. I have so much more respect and love and compassion for men just by hearing their journey, what they've experienced with women, with their mothers and with their fathers, and how much pressure that's been placed upon them. Another common trauma that I see, and I mean, I have worked with a lot of women who suffer from sexual abuse as well, and also currently as well. So yeah, sexual abuse, 100%, that's like the number one massive trauma that I'm working with quite a bit. The second one would be emotional neglect. So being abandoned by their mother, very much so by their mother, and it could also be by their father as well. So not having that emotional support, not having their emotional needs met when they were a baby or a child. So that is also a common trauma that I see in both men and women as well.
Okay. Coming back to let's unpack that a little bit, right? Because the concept of a man getting raped by a woman is something that's not spoken about a lot, but it's something that I know that a lot of men suffer with. All right, let's unpack that a little bit. What does that actually look like to say a man's been raped by a woman?
I mean, there's different scenarios. I've worked with the client who is a millionaire, and he's trying to figure out his identity into retirement. And it's because he's not clear in who he is, because there's a lot of shame that he hasn't allowed himself to feel. from the sexual abuse.
Okay.
And he was raped by a woman in university who was older than him, and they were both students.
Okay.
And he was under the influence of drugs.
Okay.
So that's how he got raped, and he was aware what was going on, but he couldn't move his body.
Right.
So that's one scenario. The other scenario was a different client. It was a satanic ritual abuse. So he was raped by multiple men, by his father. So the babies and kids were brought to a private room or a church, and the kids would be given up for offering, and they would physically rape the babies and the toddlers.
Wow.
Yes. And sometimes females would be involved. He was also raped by his mother as well.
How do you, I mean, it sounds so harrowing.
I mean, I can share more examples, but I'm going to leave it at that.
No, I think we're okay. How do you even begin? Excuse me. How do you even begin to deal with unpacking the trauma of somebody who's been through a situation like that? Like, where do you begin?
First of all, I need to create trust and safety with my clients first before they share that information with me. It does take people a while to share that information with me because there's a lot of shame around that. They've been humiliated by people that they trusted. So I need to create that safe space for them, especially if they've been raped by a female. I need to come across as someone who is strong enough to hold space for them, but also have the intelligence through the heart and intuition to be able to give them feedback from a loving place where their blind spots are. And also learning from my mentors who are very successful in this space, how they would approach these sort of clients and what they would use in terms of healing modalities, and how would they work with that sort of client. So that's what I've learned from my mentors, and I apply that into the healing session, as well as trusting my intuition, my spirit, what is guiding me to do to help this client to get them to the other side of that experience.
Okay. And generally, when you start on this journey and you've built this trust, how or what impact does it have on these men? Like, what's the journey that you see them go through?
Yeah, it's an emotional roller coaster ride for them with this journey, because it's trauma, it's intense. Especially with men, they tend to cover up the shame through a mask and presenting a different image of themselves where they're strong, where they're successful, whatever it is, to protect themselves. I can say this because I used to do that, especially with what I've experienced as well. I would present this image where everything is good, that my dress business back then is killing it, rah, 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 but it wasn't. And so there was a lot of shame around that. And so with the men, I can resonate with what they're going through to some extent. And it's about providing that support. What I've learned from those experiences with those particular male clients is I need to learn not to overdo it with the support, because it would feel like they're being mothered or suffocated by a woman. So that was the beautiful gift that I've learnt with those sort of clients, is that less is more, Jess. You're not there to rescue them, even though you have so much compassion for them, but less is more. That's what I've learnt with them. And so at the end of the journey, and even like towards the end, they've experienced massive shifts. They're a lot more clearer in who they are. They're starting to realize that trauma is not their identity, that they are worthy of being loved and receiving love, and to look after themselves through self-care, because there was self-sabotage tendencies to not connect with themselves, because it's very vulnerable to do so.
Of course.
And also one of my clients who went through that ritual abuse, he had a massive shift with his mother. They have a healthy and functional relationship now.
Amazing. Amazing. So there's a process of forgiveness that they go through also.
You could say that. I feel more so it's compassion.
Okay.
More so compassion for themselves before they can be compassionate towards another, towards the abuser. Yeah.
Okay. And what is that like once somebody has learned to be compassionate towards themselves, learned to love themselves and appreciate themselves and kind of champion, their own, looking for the right word, their own spirituality, if you want to call it that. What do you see? How do you see them differently once they've been through that process?
I feel for them, and also with myself, there has to be a shift within yourself to be able to see yourself in a different light. Because if we're so caught up in trauma, it's not easy to see ourselves in a different lens because we're so caught up in seeing ourselves from the lens of trauma. So there has to be a shift that needs to occur for that to happen, for them to reconnect with themselves in their heart space and to see themselves from a compassionate space. Because as soon as you use compassion in your healing process, that's when you're willing to feel into the shame and drop the mask. And it's not easy because a lot of us have a strong resistance to that because it's a coping mechanism not to feel.
Yes. How do you encourage people to deal with that coping mechanism?
Yeah, so I would say, from my understanding and learnings from my teachers and my personal experiences, is that we need to feel safe within ourselves first. Okay. So the reason why we get caught up in the defense coping mechanism is because we don't feel safe. And in particular, we don't feel safe in our body. So what can we do to connect with our body? Somatic release is a big one. So you've mentioned with mentality, one of the focuses is physical. And I agree with that because we do hold trauma in our physical body. And that's also known as psychosomatics, mind-body connection, where there's different parts of our body that is suppressed with certain emotions. So for example, if you have a stiff neck, that means you're a control freak. Why? Because you didn't feel safe in your family dynamic. You didn't feel safe in your home. So you have the need to control your environment, conversations, who you engage with people. So your body is constantly telling you what needs to be expressed and released. If you ignore it, that leads to what the medical industry calls a disease or illness.
Okay. And coming away from it, because one thing I do know when I speak to many men is that they struggle to find these places or these spaces where they can go and have this release or have this understanding of how to be compassionate with themselves, as you put it. What could people do? What could men more specifically do in their own little quiet space?
Yes, it's very simple. So when I shared my journey, how I started out, it was yoga and in nature. So if men could give themselves permission to create a sacred space for themselves, to spend some time in nature, minimum 20 minutes, barefoot on the park or the beach, where they can connect with the elements of the earth. I mean, Mother Earth, we can use her as our mother to hold space for us, to nurture us, to support us so we can be held. And that in her frequency in itself can shift our own energy frequency. That's one. Another one is yoga. If someone like myself back then wasn't able to afford yoga classes, maybe find where can you get free yoga classes? YouTube. There's plenty of that on YouTube. Yin yoga would be the best one, especially for sexual abuse, because they focus on opening up the heart space and the hips to release the trauma.
Okay. Amazing. I think that within itself resonates. People need to get out, be grounded, get at one with Mother Nature and do more yoga. Yeah, awesome. And then also, Jess, how would people reach you? Like, if people wanted to find you, because I'm assuming you're not just limited to Australia or to Bondi. You have international clients also. If somebody wanted to reach out or kind of have a conversation with you, where would they find you?
Yes, so they can find me on two platforms, which is my website and on YouTube. So my website is lifeinconfidence.com. So that's LIFEINCONFIDENCE. And you can also find me on my YouTube channel, which is Life in Confidence.
Excellent. I know there's many more conversations that we can have, and we could probably keep going for hours and hours and hours, many more stories. But I would like the audience to be able to have access and reach you and actually ask you the questions that they want to ask you, as opposed to me feeding it to them. So I encourage everyone who's watching this to reach out to Jess, follow her on YouTube, and just if there's any questions or anything that you want to know, either put them in the comment section or reach out to Jess directly or MEN-tality directly, and I'm sure we'll be able to facilitate the conversation.
Definitely. If you have any questions and you feel like you would like to have a private conversation, you can send me an email, jessxgoh@lifeinconfidence.com. And I also have a free webinar on how to overcome the impacts of childhood trauma in 3 months.
We'll put the link for that webinar in the description to direct people towards it. But for now, Jess, I just want to say a huge thank you for doing this. A huge thank you for sharing your story, and a huge thank you for sharing the stories and some of the anecdotes of the men that are out there that are suffering and going through their things, and just basically shining a light and letting us know that there are people like yourself, there are spaces, and there are places that we can go to actually begin on that journey of consciousness and to begin on that journey of compassion, and seeing ourselves in a different light and living life in the abundance that we're supposed to.
Definitely, 100%. And I have to say, I'm really grateful for all of the men who have triggered me, traumatized me, whether it's my father, my uncle, ex-lovers. I thank them so much, because I would not be the woman that I am today.
That's an awesome perspective. Accepting what you've been through to get you to where you are.
Yes, that's right.
Amazing. Well, Jess, thank you once again. And yeah, this has been the MEN-tality Podcast.